making one note of something here. All right. I don't think we need to wait necessarily for anybody else. Probably makes sense just to get things rolling here. Again, goal here, I want to try to be done in an hour. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that, but so it looks like half the people, well, a little bit more than half the people were at Connect, and the rest of you weren't. So I think the biggest thing for me for today is I want to kind of share exactly what happened at Connect.
DNN Connect. Yeah.
Regarding the conversations with Andy and Ash, what that direction means for us going forward, and then talk a little bit about assigning some tasks to folks. And Tomas, you joining is fantastic because I bet you know nothing. With that, let me pull up my email that I sent to...
Hey, Mitch, just so you know, it's being recorded at this moment.
Yep, I know. And I'm totally fine with it. I do want to reserve a couple minutes at the end just in case we need them for the other stuff, but let me bring this up here. Okay, there it is. Okay, and open. No. All right. So let's. Sorry, Zoom doesn't like my ginormous monitor, so I have to like break this email out to where I can show you just the email. Okay. You guys should, with a little bit of luck, see my email window now.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so basically what happened at Connect, there was a little bit of a struggle to get everything arranged and the initial meeting going, but in the end, he was able to get a sit-down conversation with Ash and Andy. Clint was there with me, and then Daniel joined for part of it as well. The key being, really, once we sat down in the room and kind of rehashed all of the things that were said, the short summary is basically everything that was said was exactly what was intended. So the community driving, the community leading was exactly what they wanted. But for whatever reason, I don't think that, those words meaning those words was fully understood or directed down through the rest of the people involved. So we talked at length about process, procedure, approvals, what would be needed to, take and make everybody happy. So first and foremost, I kind of started out, as with anything, we're restating everything that was decided. We had this conversation. We had multiple follow-up conversations afterwards in terms of restating everything. But the key being that we have a number of deliverables that are to happen here in the next couple of weeks. Just given the timings with DNN Connect, I didn't want to set deadlines too long on anything. The deadlines that are here right now are things I have set. We've not received a confirmation from others that they'll be able to commit to that 100%. But I know that I talked with Ash a bit about how quickly on these items, et cetera. But basically, I'll come back to the deliverables here in a second, and the community priorities. But basically, the general summary here is we are in charge of DNN platform, period. That's the best summary that I can give. Now, From there, there's a number of key concerns that related to all. David, yeah. All right, there's a number of things really that kind of come together around what was decided. So first and foremost, we have had the conversations around the DNN platform work items. So the things that ESW has been working on, the things that they have been fixing throughout the last couple of releases, and even some of the things that are going on now, and expressed the concern around the fact that those items are not properly attributed or put in a place that we know what's going on. As such, that's made it hard for us to be able to identify, is the community working on the same thing that ESW is working on? What exactly was being fixed by ESW? Things of that nature. So with that, we've agreed that to be able to manage this relationship, ESW is going to have to work in the same process and procedure that we do. If they do something internally that is a secondary thing, so an internal JIRA so that they can track against whatever else they're doing, that's fine. But in the end, anything that they have, their known work items, they're going to take from their internal JIRA and they're going to put into the DNN issue tracker. Only noted exception to that would be security issues, which we'll handle in an offline manner, as we have done historically. We as a community will make sure that we create a work item for any of the things that we're working on. And as we're working on items, we want to make sure that we're making note that this is an item in progress, so that if somebody is taking something and they're working on it, somebody knows that that's being done. And this way, if there's something that's going on, if there's something that's a priority that one of the other groups would want us to do, these kinds of meetings within the TAG group would be a great time for ESW to raise something to the community's attention. Can you guys work on this? For example, GDPR. Maybe that's a little bit more of an extreme example. With regards to making this email a shared Google Doc, that is definitely something that I'm going to do. And also I'm going to document all of these processes as well. But I can share the full email that way as well. We also talked about the extension validation service. There was a lot of conversations. Daniel brought up a couple of good points about false positives that come out of the tool. I also have notes about just the fact that it's needed as a requirement for a number of other things. So for example, there's some invalid rules where if you have conditional logic to check for if on Azure do this, otherwise, this kind of thing, we can go from there. And real quick, just I see a couple conversations going on. There are a couple steps necessary. So the public issue tracker, the existing DNN JIRA that's out there, that will be marked as read only. It's an item on the to-do list for Ash to take care of. There's also been a couple things still coming in terms of pull requests from ESW that don't have work items associated to them. My guess is that's because people like Tomas have not seen any of this email detail until about 3 minutes ago when we started talking about it. So there is a little bit of a ramp up period for everybody being on the same page here. And just something that will get addressed here in the next week or so along the way. But with the extension validation service, the biggest concern is that service stores install packages that can have some confidential nature items in it, and there's also some hard-coded strings. So right now, ESW is going to get the tool working again, and then Ash is going to provide a timeline on what it would take to remove the sensitive bits from the code and make it so that it's something that the community could contribute to, However, ESW will still manage the actual deployment and environment that it runs in due to the security considerations of the processing that it does, at least for the near term. Cloud support for DNN, we talked about this a bit as well. In general, we'll be able to get a web request caching provider that will allow us to work in load balanced environments for platform. Part of that will be that there's going to be a new provider being created for Evoke, and they'll be released as a pair. So platform will get the web request, will get a web request caching provider. Evoke will get its own. Couple notes and stipulations here in terms of about how that is all going to go down. That's a bit that I want to keep, needs to stay a little bit more quiet. Pull requests then were the next item. The biggest thing that I got from here, solidifying our place in the process, is when talking about a build that was a pull request that was submitted that broke the build. Andy unequivocally said, reject it. It doesn't matter who it came from, that kind of thing. So we have that in place. With that in mind, we've came to the following process in terms of what has to be there. And I'm working to get all of this documented into that draft document that we've been doing. I just have not had enough time yet since getting back home. But basically, every pull request must have an associated work item. If the code change is to an area that already has unit tests, then those unit tests need to be updated with the new functionality. So if it's something that doesn't have any unit tests today, we're not making a unit test stipulation. But if it is an area that's unit tested, then we need to make sure we retain the integrity of that test. We'll want to encourage the inclusion of additional unit tests, but we didn't agree to not make it a requirement. The pull request must pass the automated build, which right now I believe we're pretty close to having the current automated build pass. I know that there's been a couple pull requests working on a couple of the tests that have been failing. So hopefully that will be there. And then once we get the new stuff in place, we should be set. And then the pull request must be reviewed and approved by 2 of the authorized approvers. So the authorized approver list that we've agreed to at this point mutually would be Tomas from the ESW side, and sorry for spelling your name wrong. And then from the community side, it would be myself, Oliver, Peter, Brian, and Daniel. I'm looking at potentially adding 2 more individuals to that list. We'll see. But basically, we need to have 2 people approve every pull request. And on top of that, you cannot approve your pull request, any approval of your own pull request ever going forward is immediate revocation of your ability to approve pull requests. So with that, what this gives us is it's proving that we get a double check on anything that we get in from the community. It also gives us a double check on anything coming in from the ESW side of things. There's a secondary requirement here that's not specifically noted in this, but basically a change that adds a new feature does need to have a specification associated with it. The reason for that is one of the, to the next bullet point, ESW has agreed to provide us QA resources to do regression acceptance testing on a release by release basis. So not on an individual pull request basis, but they will be able to take care of things for us on a release. Well, for them to be able to do the, for them to be able to do that QA testing, they, they should be able to test that new functionality with a specification document. And keep in mind that the QA people that we have are not necessarily all that familiar with DNN platform. So we need to make sure that those specs as they come in with a level of detail. And to Tomas's point, I should say that the rejection of a pull request when it breaks the build on the automated side, we're not merging at that point without additional change. So I should clarify. That's when we say that it will be rejected, we're not reviewing it. We're not doing the community approvals or anything like that until that build passes. It's not we're never ever going to accept it. It is a fix and try again because you haven't met the minimum thresholds coming in. And I'll make sure to make note of that in the process. So with all of that, we then started talking about the release process in terms of how we can do things as a community. Talking about semantic versioning, deprecating methods, breaking change releases and things like that, especially with the opinions that were expressed by the community around everything that happened with 9.2, developer experience, end user experience, and everything in between. So we've agreed, to semantic versioning with major, minor, revision. Major, minor versions, or minor and revision versions, may tag something as deprecated, so we can mark it as removal. However, we cannot make any public changes to public methods at that point in time, so no breaking changes. Methods, when we go and mark them as deprecated, we will be tagging them as deprecated in version X, and the method will be removed in version Y. And the difference between X and Y must be at least 2. So for example, if we mark something to 9.2.2 as deprecated, it would not be removed until 11. To be able to give people time to know what's going on. That comment will be there in all of their build failures, etc., throughout the process. And then with this came from the community feedback during the panel discussion and everything else, which is basically due to the break and change nature of those major releases where we remove everything. If there are security fixes that are part of that release, we need to try to do best efforts to make one last release on that prior version. So if we were on 10.2 and we went to go to 11, but there were a couple of security fixes, we would want to release a 10.2.1 as well as an 11.0 on the same day, so that those security fixes could be applied, if at all possible. And that's something we will have to look at the feasibility of it based on the fixes necessary. But backporting a couple individual fixes in that manner might be acceptable. Again, what we're trying to do is minimize the burden on the community for those breaking change releases, at least immediately. And then with this, we talked about the release timeline process in terms of when we say we're ready to release, what does that timeline look like? So the current thought process right now, and this is one of the things pending confirmation from Ash and QA, would be that we have a code freeze that is 3 weeks before the release for a minor or a revision release, or 5 weeks for a major version release. That would then allow ESW's QA to do their final regression. So they would have a week to do their final regression and report anything back to the community. We then would release a release candidate version. The goal with this would be a true build, just like it's going to be. And the goal being that it's a good release candidate, and the release candidate becomes the real release with no further changes. However, the goal is to give the community and ESW a 2-week window for minor and revision releases, or 4 weeks for major releases to validate the release. Once we get all of the thumbs up, then we can release the final release with any changes associated. As to the release schedule, Matt's question of, every quarter. From my perspective right now, I think that a quarterly release would be really nice, because one of the biggest questions that we get from people is, what are we doing? When are we releasing? And if we got to once a quarter, that would be a pretty good pace to just have steady things out to the community. That would be my goal, but I know that we need to kind of work with Oliver based on some of the roadmap discussions that were had last week, and just kind of plan in a release cycle expectation based on the QA resources and stuff associated. So then with that, there's a number of different things that kind of came out of this. The other piece being, we talked about getting the community involved in being able to help with the security alias. So we have a deliverable item for Ash to work with the legal team to determine, what kind of NDA would be needed to get one of us looped in. For right now, I volunteered. If we have somebody else that wants to, we can definitely discuss. The other big thing that came out of this with Andy was support for community members making their own distributions. So if you wanted to distribute an e-commerce solution that was all set and ready to go, with that distribution, it automatically has your module included. It has an install template that creates all of the pages, etc. As of right now, the answer is that's not a problem. It's something that is embraced by Andy. The biggest thing is that it will need to be distributed by that individual. We're confirming, Andy's working to confirm with legal if there are any trademark concerns. He wasn't initially even concerned about it. I just know that with all the historical conversations that we've had about trademark, I want to make sure we have, a valid, you just can't say this or you can't say that when you do it, and go with it from there. So Andy's working on getting that. Ash is going to work with QA to get us the template of the minimum standards for the specifications, as well as the existing platform bugs and work items, and access to NuGet so we can actually deploy NuGet packages out there, and then the timeline for the caching provider items. And then I'm going to work on taking all of this stuff and turning it into community documentation so that we can put it on the wiki, basically evolving it from where we were at. I'll probably do additional shared documents so that we can continue to get everybody's feedback and review on those drafts before they get published. And then we need to make sure that we have the permission set correctly on GitHub so that we get everything squared away. We need to get some information out to the greater community as well about these changes as we get everything done. And then some EVS stuff. Now, from a community perspective, I know that we have some items that we've already been working on. And this, at least from my opinion, really puts us in a place where, we are released to be able to kind of get things going. So Andrew, all of your efforts on the builds sure seems to be full steam ahead now in terms of getting that stuff done.
So Mitch, I had a question on that.
Yeah.
Because before DNN Connect, I was very confused on the direction we were taking with that, because I thought I heard somebody mentioning on GitHub on one of the pull requests that Tomas and I were working on that we weren't using VSTS by a couple of people over at DNN. Is this all approved to move forward then? Is that what I'm hearing? Because I haven't heard anything really
whichever, as far as I'm aware right now, as a community, as long as we agree and have the tools to accomplish it, which basically is either VSTS or AppVer, but I don't believe we control that AppVer account.
We don't.
So as far as my knowledge, and Ash, correct me if I'm wrong, But if we can do it with VSTS under the stuff from .NET Foundation, I'm not aware of any concern.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. One thing I don't know is that if VSTS is that just a compile and unit test service, or is that does it do any automation as well?
It's a full pipeline.
Could do whatever you want as far as continuous integration, continuous delivery.
Okay, so it can like fire up a DNN site and do some automation on that?
We'd have to do some customization to do that, but we should be able to accomplish something along those lines.
I see, because I think that is going to be needed because that's what the automation runs. And now, as I understand, it's all free to us through the .NET Foundation.
Yeah, we have. Andrew, did you ever find out the specifics on the limits associated to that account?
That's a big question, and I don't know. I know if you get just a free VSTS account, you get 120 free build minutes a month with one agent. And then once you start paying for it, you get 2 agents. And like for example, mine, I got more minutes than I can ever use up. If we start creating a CI/CD pipeline that needs to do a DNN deployment and run through some UI tests that end up taking, let's say, an hour for each nightly build, I don't know if they might come back to us and say, you guys are using way too many minutes. That's something, Clint, is that something that they mentioned to us of how many minutes we have?
No, they did not mention any limits. They just said that the .NET Foundation had an account and there was already another project there. And as you saw, I mean, they configured and provisioned the access like within an hour. So I would say we start down the path that we want to do and ask for forgiveness instead of permission. I mean, if we hit some limit, I'm sure they would let us know.
Oh, we'll know, because when you hit that limit, all your builds start failing until the next month.
Yep. Then we ask for more time or something.
But to get I guess the basics of this started, it's not going to include, a full DNN deployment and a UI test. It's going to be, getting builds, unit tests, and release installers built. And then the stuff you were mentioning, Ash, is kind of the next step.
Right. So I think what we have to decide is that when we do the 921, and Mitch, I've not really gone through the full list yet. I'm just catching up on other stuff, and it's on my to-do list to go through your email.
Yep.
Did we now for the 921? Would we want to streamline everything, like have the community do the packaging and everything?
Ideally, I'd like 921 to be the one that we do. I think it depends on timeline, on where the existing tools are in terms of what you guys have in place now versus what we have in place. So I think that's going to really depend on exactly where we want. And I think one of the things that I think is going to be important in one capacity or another is to almost maybe break out into a couple of subgroups to get a couple of these things squared away in terms of like for 9.2.1. We need to kind of figure out exactly when we want to do this. There's a lot of moving parts to getting this community handover done. So it may make sense to say that we're going to call a 9.2.1 release. The last one done by, it'd be the last one done by ESW, and then we take over at 9.2.2. That may make more sense. And then we just start moving forward, especially since, getting the pull request process and everything in place. But that's one detail that I think we need to kind of come to an agreement once we have all of the other parts in place. We don't have all of we don't have all of the access right now, for example, to do the release, since we don't have access to NuGet to do the deploy. So it all comes down to the timeline on a 9.2.1.
Mm-hmm.
Could I add something to this? There's 2 things I'd like to add. The first thing is that as we're trying to deliver fairly quick fixes to 9.2, and there is a big need for that, I'm actually thinking probably 921 and 922 are not going to be VSTS built yet, simply because I think until all that runs, it's going to take us, I'm going to say anything 4 to 8 weeks. And then where we want to be really sure we didn't like introduce new bugs with that and some things won't work. So I would like prioritize getting bugs out and do the VSTS at the same time. And the second thing I'd like to add, just maybe Mitch, that'd be something to work on too in your notes, is we're not using Git flow at the moment on GitHub on DNN. For example, the master branch is called development or something like that, which is just in general for the standards not really ideal. And if we're going to automate things later on, it would be good if we were in a typical convention. I think that would be Git flow.
Yeah, one of the things that Ash and I need to chat about, because I think Ash, you're the one that has the permissions, is also setting up everything in the repository for number of approvers and or number of approvals needed, that kind of stuff, which I think we can configure. So we need to get that configured, as well as just this the concept of the CI build stopping a pull request from coming in as well.
So I can set any of that for you as well. So ping me.
Okay, perfect. Maybe you and I can just chat real quick and see what we need to do just to implement, 2 approvals necessary, and then the automated builds passing. Granted, we have to get the automated build working before we can require it to file as a requirement for the pull request to come in.
And Mitch, a quick question about the NuGet. Now, were you guys planning or thinking about pushing with every build, or is it only towards the end of the release?
Only each release, I believe, still. So it was still, there would be a push for. It's part of the final process, right? For a 9.2.1 release, it's all of the artifacts on the releases page plus new versions of the NuGet packages for 9.2.1.
Are we planning to do a cleanup of NuGet to get the older packages in there as well and get them consistent in the same way that the newer ones are done?
If there is a break in that, Peter, I do believe we should try to go back and fix them. I'm a little confused by the break that you have with the 9, whatever one it was that you have, because I've tried on multiple machines and never been able to get it to fail. So we should follow up on that. If there is an older package that doesn't work, I do believe we should fix it.
Yeah.
And I believe we can do that with NuGet.
Right, because developers like taking dependencies on older frameworks so they can cover a larger part of the market. So one of the things I'll have my eye on is seeing if we can, for instance, make sure that all the way back to DNN 8, we have working DNN packages that are also, labeled in the same way, because we also have .NET Nuke bundle that includes a number of DLLs. And I think that .NET Nuke bundle should also, everything should go back to DNN 8, more or less.
Well, good luck building the older packages. Currently, a lot of the dependencies that have been used were in MyGet, and MyGet was very eager on deleting even packages that have been downloaded. So there's the retention policy. It's been set up to keep whatever, at least if there was one download, but I don't know if the counters are wrong, or I witnessed it even delete package 10 minutes after it had been pushed. So we have a lot of the old branches will be very hard to build, or it may not be the exact same thing that it used to be.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not aware of the intricacies of this. I've never released NuGet packages myself, but I'm happy to believe you on that.
Yeah, so we at DNN, we do the release manually. There's a username, password, you log into the site, and then you upload the files one by one. More than happy to send that credential to you, Mitch, after this call. I have to just look for that, because we did that recently for 9.2. I have that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we should try to get that reserved group so we can have more of a manage it as an organization on NuGet so that we can add and remove people and don't have to share credentials, which I can look into.
Okay.
Along the way, that would make it a little bit easier.
That probably is better, right? Yeah.
And then I believe, Andrew, your idea with the automated builds was to be able to do a gated release, right, where we'd be able to actually have that as part of a deployment step.
Yeah.
Approval.
Yeah, so the idea was we'd have our CI and unit test, but then when we were ready to do a release, we'd have a full release pipeline that we would be able, that would pretty much be gated until we're ready to approve it. When we approve it, at that point, it would deploy out all of the NuGet dependencies. It would drop the installers up on the DNN website, and any of the additional documentation that needs to be distributed. We'd be able to automate that all through the VSTS release pipeline.
Well, I think similar to what Oliver just wrote in the chat a few minutes ago, let's first make sure that we can do it very well manually, and then it will be, and we can worry about automating it, all of it. But let's first work on what and how we want to do, because the process has been quite complicated for DNN until now. So we need to optimize first, and then we can automate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only real minimum threshold that we need to get for a build, at least to assist in the pipeline right now, would be a basic compile and run the unit tests. It would be the bare threshold on the branches, just to help vet things as they come in as part of the review process. Everything above and beyond that is fantastic and long-term will be very good. But I think if we had to do a manual setup for the next release, I don't believe it would be the end of the world. So in other words, to Andrew, to your question of like, what's the timeline? The timeline is we need to be realistic. And this is where we want to be really careful as a community, right? We are doing all of this on a volunteer basis, which means that we have to juggle all of our other priorities. So in a traditional world, it may be a week, but the reality here is it may be 4 or 6. So what we need to know is what it realistically might look like, and then we kind of plan accordingly. Do we wait for it, or do we do manual to get us through? And that's where I think we need to have a separate roadmap conversation for what does 921 look like. Do we have the stuff in there today? Is there other stuff that like we need this for 921? And what does that end up being?
Yeah, so I'll get back to you guys on where we are. And like I said, I'm just catching up and what all is needed. And so I'll get back to you on that. Now, one thing I wanted to clarify is that when we're talking about CI/CD, so do you want, when the pull request is submitted, the test to run when the pull request is submitted, right? I mean, that's the idea, so that reviewer has some idea that at least it's compiling and at least the existing unit tests are passing.
Exactly. Yep. And that's the that's what I would call the barest of minimums, which I believe, to the earlier comment, I believe with AppVeyor right now, it is working or almost all the way there. Not 100% sure.
I think it started working the last few commits. I've seen green check boxes on commits. And it looks like AppVeyor is set up. It looks like Jenkins is also set up. So there's 2 automated builds that are running.
Do we have something showing up on our GitHub repository to say that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, if you go and look at...
if you click commits and code, you should see like a green check box against the last couple commits from the development branch.
Well, we could add the badge, right? From Avera or VSTS if we get that. Speaking of, let's just change the subject a little bit, but the requirement, I'm still not 100% sold on the requirement for an issue for each pull request. Say there is a typo somewhere. Does it really require a issue first and managing both of them, rather than it's quite common for a community to just pop up out of nowhere and submit a pull request. So if it's not a big deal, really something minor.
I think is the guideline behind that, or where we were going with the conversation, was we need the documentation so that when the people are reviewing the request, they know what is there. So for a small change, I think it would be feasible for a pull request as long as it has enough detail. I worry about deciding the specifics there. So, for example, pull request 2088, which was basically changes to the install resource files for the Spanish translation. That's one that doesn't have a issue associated with it. But the detail here, we really need some more detail. It's nice enough, right? Okay, added missing translation, some mistakes corrected. What was the basis for that is the stuff that typically is missed on an issue. And that was where we were discussing kind of the need for that extra context. And maybe it is that we document a way for this to work. That if it's a text change, translation change, or otherwise, but we would need to, I think, spell out specifically what that is. And that's part of the process where I really think that here, I want to draft all of this, which would be what they do for not only the release process, but then also the documentation stuff. So what do the specs look like? What is what should come in with a pull request, et cetera? And I can work on getting an initial rough draft out for that stuff, and we'll do it through Google Docs. And, I welcome any additional thoughts or information that the rest of you have.
My suggestion on this would be that we will say that we will create a list, let's say a list of things that are allowed to be changed without specs, but when in doubt, it's always with specs or with an issue.
Yeah.
And then we can work on from there, because even spell changes, sometimes people have a preference or something, but then it would not align with other spelling or other things. So sometimes even trivial things will end up running like a shitstorm because somebody's like, why was this changed to the French Swiss spelling instead of the French spelling? And that
well, and actually a really good example here. Let me change my screen sharing here 1 second. Let me share this. So Joe Brinkman's pull request is a great example of one that really, by definition, his comment is enough. The change that he made is literally that many characters. The problem is it's the ramifications of what this change could be that really would make it something that really should have a spec behind it to document what was done to test that it didn't break anything. And that's the only thing about as we start to get into some of this, because what's going to end up happening is we're going to end up having a pretty long review conversation on these ones that don't come in with all of that detail first. And what I'd like to do, I know Oliver, I think you mentioned, an item template or a pull request template to make sure that we get all of the detail that we need here. I really want to see that we get these pull requests with enough detail so that we have, a release note, for example, that we can add as part of the release notes, etc.
Is there a default template you can put in the project, like with issues?
Yeah, we can configure it. We just have to figure out all the fields that we want. I was going to come up with a draft and post it in the tag group here one of these days.
Yeah, that sounds great. Because there also, if we would like have a, let's say, a whitelist of, let's say, low impact changes, you could reference those with a link in there. So the moment somebody does a pull request, he sees that, and he can remove the lines he doesn't care about, and he sees a link to the whitelist or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. All right. Real quick, just we've got about 10 minutes left. Clint, can you maybe stop recording for a couple minutes just so we can have a